Ladies and gentlemen, this Gaming.com video. If there's one thing that's been taking the headlines a lot this year, it's the rumours that both Sony and Microsoft are planning an interim upgrade of their console technologies. You've probably heard of these rumours. With Sony, it is of course the PlayStation 4 Neo, which is touted to have a performance upgrade of around 2.27 times that of the vanilla PS4, which you may have at your home, and the Xbox One, less is known, but we can probably expect to see rough performance upgrades in line with the PlayStation 4. So let's say roughly a GPU which is as powerful as the PS4 0.5, the Neo. That's the rumour. Now, a recent earnings call from Electronic Arts has actually touched on this from their perspective, and it's quite interesting. It actually somewhat corroborates the theories that a lot of tech enthusiasts have had, whether that's reporters or whether that's just folks on forums. Now, I'm going to read this out in its entirety. It's not particularly lengthy. It is from the CFO of the company. His name is Blake Jorgensen. Hopefully I pronounced the later name correctly. In terms of any mid-cycle upgrades, once again, I can't predict. But what I can tell you is that we've heard, I think publicly from the console makers, is that realising compatibility issues across consoles is an important customer issue. And as Microsoft have shown, they've tried to do some backwards compatibility on to older titles and new titles. I think that's going to be an important part of what a mid-cycle upgrade might look like if there is one, which removes a lot of the risk association we've seen historically with console cycles. We don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. They're of course referring to Electronic Arts themselves, because we feel our ability to develop for whatever new technology comes, the risk has been minimised because we've moved towards a single engine, which is Frostbite, and we're able to port that to whatever platform, or point that to whatever platform is evolving or is upgrading. In addition, our business model is so much more diverse now than it has been historically, that the notion of console cycle becomes somewhat irrelevant in our way to generate strong earnings or cash flow. And so we'll be seeing some interesting... So we'll all be interested to see what Microsoft and Sony come out with if they do something at E3 or sometime in the year to come. But we're excited about the continued growth in the business and not afraid of a cycle change if it was to occur. Now, EA did predict sales of about 25 million for the current generation consoles, that's the PS4 and the Xbox One, through this year, which tallies up rather nicely with the 55 million which is supposedly in the market since 2013, and also tallies up rather nicely with AMD's own remarks during an earnings conference last month, if memory serves, and they basically predicted that the current generation systems are going to continue to sell like hotcakes. So, what we can take away from this fairly short statement is a couple of things. The first is that Electronic Arts are obviously confident in their own products, and they're pushing those because that's kind of what they're going to do. But the big thing is that it actually corroborates the fact that we're going to be seeing a more phone-like iteration of hardware. So, let's say, for the sake of argument, you look back at the NES to SNES, or the Master System to the Mega Drive. Now, in the case of the Master System to Mega Drive, there was the power-based converter. You might remember that, and it allowed you to play the Master System games on the Mega Drive, but you needed that converter to do it, which was obviously backwards compatibility. For the Xbox, the original Xbox, I was about to say Xbox One, for the original Xbox to the 360 there was some backwards compatibility, and for the PS2, of course, it was backwardly compatible with the PS1. The PS3 had some backwards compatibility. You know as well as I do that, of course, Microsoft are very proud of the backwards compatibility they've managed to get out of the Xbox One in relation to the Xbox 360. But a lot of those consoles, a lot of those systems are very different in terms of the hardware. What you start running into issues is emulation requires a lot of technical oomph. Emulation requires the actual CPUs or the GPU or what have you to actually, in many cases, emulate a specific hardware function of that system. So for the sake of argument, if you have a chip which was specifically created, not only does the CPU of the host machine need to emulate the CPU of the machine it's running, but it would also need to, for example, emulate the FX chip of the SNES, which is one of the reasons that emulation can be quite taxing on machines. And one of the reasons, for example, that we see the GameCube or the Dolphin emulator eat up a lot of cycles when, if you were to say run, let's say Resident Evil 4, natively x86 code for the PC, it doesn't really require that much technical powers. On the other hand, if you're trying to run that same game through, let's say, Dolphin, you need a hell of a lot more CPU oomph. Now, I am somewhat simplifying this for the sake of this video, but the basic point is that customers come to expect a certain level of backwards compatibility, but they also want a lot more, I guess you could say that they want hardware to evolve a lot faster. So I guess from Electronic Arts' perspective, what they're hoping for is that we're going to see the, I wouldn't say faster adoption of hardware as in we're going to see it at the speed of mobile phones, because I don't necessarily think that we as customers would want that. I mean, could you imagine if there's going to be a new Xbox every year? I think people would get a bit pissed. And honestly, at that point, I think a lot of folks would just switch to PC. And to be honest with you, I think you'd probably be better off, because you'd still probably get better deals in terms of the price, performance, and just overall experience, in my opinion. But let's say you were to get a new console every 2 to 3 years, let's say 3 years, and that console was fully backwards compatible with a couple of generations ago, that could certainly be one way to go, and it would stop a lot of the problems we've had in terms of hardware performance. Another theory behind all of this is that Microsoft and Sony could sell a couple of versions of hardware. So they would sell, for example, the PS4 and then the PS4 Plus. The PS4 Plus would obviously have the more robust CPU, the more robust GPU, and more powerful hardware as a technical whole. It's a very interesting point of view that we are kind of split down the middle, because I've seen some people who really love the idea and love the idea of gaming at, like, let's say 1080p or 1440p at 60 frames per second or whatever the new systems are capable of, whereas others really hate it because they feel that they've bought into a generation of systems and they're used to the, let's say, 5 to 6 years of being able to just say, okay, I've got a system and my system is going to be capable of running all the same games as my friend Bob's system, and it's going to look the same. No one's going to have any advantages. If I buy Crysis on the Xbox 360, it's going to look the same no matter what you're doing, unless of course you're playing on like a crappy television. Now, I believe is a good possibility EA have seen these systems. The reason I believe that is because it would make a lot of sense. There is a possibility that both developers are being rather cagey, but from what we've heard, developers have seen them live. Now, whether those developers are only the first-party developers, so for the sake of argument with Sony that would be the Naughty Dogs, but I feel that there's a good chance that a lot of studios would at least have been told that there's an upgrade cycle coming. This is particularly true because supposedly, the latter part of this year, developers are going to need to code for a Neo mode. Now, what that basically means is that games are going to be essentially running on two different specs of machine. So if the game, let's say Killphone 3000, is put into a vanilla system, it's like, oh, okay, it's a vanilla system, good. If it's put it into the Neo, it's like Neo mode activated, and it will basically, I guess you could say, tart up the graphics. You're going to get better textures, higher resolutions, higher frame rates, because it realizes it's running on more technically capable hardware. For that to happen, developers, supposedly, are going to need to code their game accordingly. And this once again, supposedly is going to happen the last quarter of this year, Q4, which would mean that theoretically, if Microsoft and Sony haven't told, let's say, the likes of Electronic Arts by now, it would be pretty shocking. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't, but I would be... if I had to place a bet, I would say that Electronic Arts, because they have got Frostbite, because they are one of the absolute biggest developers out there, and publishers, may I add, there's a good chance EA have, and from what we're hearing here, the main reason behind all of this is because of backwards compatibility, and essentially giving us a sneaky upgrade, which basically means Sony and Microsoft realise that these systems are pretty much tapped out. I mean, it is what it is. The systems were pretty powerful when they released, but developers have just gotten all they can out of them. If you were to do a comparative look at the GPUs inside the PS4 or the Xbox One and take a look at the comparison on the PC, let's say even the Neo is not going to be as powerful as the high-end Polaris 10. That's just a fact. It's not going to have the same clock speed, it's not going to have the same number of shaders, and God help you if you're comparing it to like the really high-end GPUs. So it's going to be a bit crazy over the next couple of years how all of this starts shaping up. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.